The people making Monaco take the mic. I'm Nancy Heslin, and welcome to Monaco Info, the podcast. Our guest today is an award-winning photojournalist, documentary filmmaker, and best-selling author known for capturing the lives of people in conflict zones and marginalized communities. The British-born activist is also committed to working with nonprofit organizations like Action Innocence Monaco, which raises awareness about the dangers of internet use to children and their parents. It may surprise listeners to learn that the Monegasque also gives classes in English to students at public schools in Monaco in everything from plastic arts and philosophy to history and Russian. Meet Nick Danziger. Welcome to Monaco Info, the podcast in English, Nick.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
I can't believe you could fit us in. I mean, you're back from Ireland, you're going to Zimbabwe. There's a lot going on in your world, I think.
There always is. I meant to be retired, but my wife says that I'm working even more than when I wasn't.
Do you wake up and go, where am I today?
In the past, that's happened to me. I think maybe a little less so now. But I don't see a future where I slow down too much.
But you enjoy everything you're doing, or you just can't say no to people?
I love what I do. It is sometimes emotionally very tough. But at the end of the day, I feel so privileged and fortunate to be able to do what I love doing, taking pictures, recording stories. And there's such an amazing world out there. And I just hope that I can continue for a little while longer.
Well, I remember the first time I saw one of Nick Danziger's photo up close, and it was at the Columbus Hotel. I remember it so clearly because it really changed my life. It made me think in a different way. It was at the Columbus Hotel. It was for International Day of the Girl, and it was the Confident Girl exhibition. And you were sharing a series of photos about women that had grown up in Sierra Leone and had their limbs brutally amputated to prevent them from voting. And there was one photo in particular of a young woman, I believe her name was Mariatu, and she was in Toronto cooking dinner, and she was in an apartment, and she was in Toronto seeking asylum. The reason these photos truly impacted me was because I looked at these women and I thought, what is it in life that makes people go one way, that they succumb to their circumstances, or they go the other way and they say, you know what, I'm going to fight for a better life? What do you see?
Well, I think so much depends on where we're born and who we're born to, what social class. And I suppose that's a little bit of my battle, is just to explain, usually to those who are more privileged, that it's incredible to think how lucky we can be in life just on the basis of that geography, of that point in place and time, and to whom we're born to, as to what our future is likely to dictate in terms of opportunities. And on the other side, I would say responsibilities. So, yeah, I think, one of the reasons that I'm driven to go back and back again is that I'm fortunate to have been born in the right place at the right time, in the right social class that has given me this freedom and opportunities, which I hope in some way my responsibility feels as though, I should maybe show how it is if we don't have those opportunities. And I think most of the planet today is really facing great difficulties.
But if we even just look at that example of those women, I mean, you photographed them, you spoke with them, you were there. What made these particular women want more in life?
I can refer to Mariatu in particular. I mean, it was part of a study that was undertaken by the International Committee of the Red Cross. It was a study about the effects of war on women. And unfortunately, women are often much more vulnerable than their male counterparts. So obviously, they can suffer from gender-based sexual violence, mutilation, as is the case in Mariatu. Also, husbands who die or disappear, then they can't inherit the land. So there's a multitude of difficulties for women. In Mariatu's case, it was very much a focus on what does take place in many of the brutal wars that continue today. that people are brutally mutilated, and then they try as best as possible to reconstruct their lives. And I think this is another very important point. We can look at a lot of the people that I photograph as victims, but I would say they're also survivors. And Mariatu is an amazing, amazing survivor. So I went back to try and find the same women 10 years later. ICRC weren't so interested. But as the stories came in, my picture agent offered up an airline ticket so that I could begin this venture. And in fact, I did find Mariatu. And so the picture that you saw was...
Can you just explain the picture to
Well, the
listeners?
initial pictures were of her living. Unbelievable to think of this. But instead of a refugee camp, it was a camp for people who had been, who were amputees. Terrible, from babies to grandmothers to fathers. I mean, the scale of what was inflicted on people specifically and brutally having their limbs chopped off. I use the word because it couldn't be more brutal. And so she was living amongst thousands of amputees.
Wow.
And I asked as to who would be interested in telling their story. So I was led to a women's theatre group, and there were two young women. And Mariatu and a friend of hers, part of the same theatre company, said, that they were willing to tell their story. And that's how that story began. And I went back to Sierra Leone on several occasions, specifically, not always specifically, but every time I went, there was that specific idea of where is Mariatu now? And I found her grandmother who said, I don't know where she is. She showed me a snap of her in the snow. And it was when one of those original images was published in a magazine that several people contacted the editorial staff and said, no, she's living in Canada. Hence the picture that you saw. She had made it to Toronto. I think she always dreamed of having, she thought that she could have new hands, lower arms, that she would be able to, as it were, not only cosmetically, but physically regain what we all use our hands for, which wasn't the case. She didn't want to put on the sort of metallic contraptions that were once given to her, and it was never going to satisfy her, the ones that were provided for. But remarkably, as you saw in the picture, Mariatu today, she cooked me a meal all on her own. She goes shopping on her own. She wears makeup and she applies the makeup on her own. So
without hands, without the use of hands.
Without the use of hands. The only, and I don't even want to say it because it was the only thing that I saw that she wasn't able to do, which was to literally fish out coins from her purse when she was at the cashier's till at the supermarket, when she was buying the ingredients for the meal she cooked for me. So there goes, survivor, these incredible people that I meet across the world, because people say, don't you get depressed and isn't it difficult? But I meet some of the most remarkable, inspiring people imaginable.
And what is it that you hope people walk away from when they look at your work, whether it's a photo, whether they read your book, whether they watch a movie? What do you want? I've walked away, and it's been almost 10 years. I still ask myself, what makes that person get out of bed and fight? What is it you hope that people walk away with?
I think it's complicated. I think originally, I wanted to change the world, but I'm beyond believing that I can do anything. I think awareness is pretty weak. I think I went from changing the world to awareness, and now I would say a lot of the work is for advocacy purposes. So it is to try and put whatever it is that needs to be changed on the agenda of policymakers.
Well, that's a pretty big list.
Well, it is, but I mean, as I said, I'm really fortunate to be able to continue this work. Recently, I was commissioned, for example, to do a story in Kenya on climate change and the future of pastoralism. So it was out with herders, camel herders, from dawn to dusk. And I would say a lot of the work is very much focused on positive social change. It's possible.
Well, I mean, as a photographer, you've spent your entire life traveling the world and in difficult and dangerous conditions. What did young Nick see in the world? You wanted to change the world, but what is it that led you to this?
I think there are probably two things. One, and I can't remember how old I was, 12 or 13. We were living in Switzerland, and I announced to my parents that I was going to Paris for the week. Well, obviously, 12-year-old, they didn't even think twice that, it was just me saying something wishful. But, I had no passport, no train ticket, no money, and I still managed to get to Paris for the week. And in those days, we didn't have, mobile cell phones. And if I remember correctly, I sent them a postcard saying, all's well, I'm having a good time. And the goal then was really very much, I wanted to be an artist, a painter, which I did end up. That's how I kind of started. But it was to visit, the great museums in Paris and works of art. And because I was interested in the arts and I sketched, that's how I made my way across Europe by sketching, and tourists, very kindly handing money over for the sketches.
When did this turn into something different?
Well, the travel was always there, and I was very curious. I dread to say it now because we know that Hergé wasn't the character that maybe we thought he was, but I was partially inspired by Tintin. Incredible adventures to Latin America. So Latin America was the kind of next big destination. So age 17, I squirreled away as much of my pocket money and earned money as possible to take myself off to South America. And bizarrely, although it was a several months long trip, I ended up in Bolivia, going down a Bolivian tin mine. And I think that was very formative.
At what age?
I think I was just 17.
Where did you grow up then? Would this have been an eye-opening experience?
The thing was that, age 12, I really caught the bug. I was really naive. I had one night in it wasn't even a bed and breakfast. It was a rundown room. That's all I had money for. And then I slept in the parks. But I remember on that first night looking for somewhere near the Gare Saint-Lazare. And these women kept on saying, do you want to come, I'll take care of you. Do you want to come back with me? I didn't really understand who they were at the time. Now I realize just how naive I was. But I would sleep in parks, always very nervous. And it was when I got to the age of 16, my dad, being American, said, you've got to stop this. You could be arrested. So he gave me a Euro pass and $100. And I said, how am I going to manage on $100? And his answer to me was, listen, if you managed on nothing, you'll do very well with $100. So, the first big trip was, to South America. There's always been a goal in mind. But equally, as I said, I wanted to be an artist, and several Latin American pre-Columbian civilizations were of great interest to me.
So what was your first story? And because obviously coming out of Monaco, a lot of us have never been in conflict zones. Can you walk us through it? You got an assignment, or you went in there and you thought, I'm going to try to do this and sell something. And what is it like to walk into that kind of an environment?
Well, I'd always been to, not always, but I had started to go to places that would have been considered adventurous, if not a little bit more. So countries where civil wars were taking place. But it was in 1982 that I applied for Winston Churchill Memorial Trust Fellowship, which was basically a grant to go off on your travels to bring knowledge back to your community. And I originally applied to fell a tree, build my own dugout canoe, and take it through the jungles of Central America. And that was cancelled very close to the departure date. And the Churchill Trust said, you can think up another project. And the two other projects, incredibly, fell by the wayside, because one was to go through Soviet Central Asia, which I'm now very attached to, and a Korean airliner. Maybe a bit too young to remember that, but it was downed out of the sky. And then I wanted to go to Myanmar, which still faces enormous problems, and that stopped me from going because there also was a suicide attack. And the Churchill Trust were beginning to not lose patience, but were beginning to have some doubts and suspicions about me. And then I said I was going to travel the ancient Silk routes to China. And
with the goal of?
Well, again, it was related to my artwork. So everything, it was so Islamic art. My work was very much related to mathematics, hence pre-Columbian civilizations, Islamic art, very geometrical. My work was in wood, multiple media, very precise, a lot of people would say it was crafts rather than art. And so that was the goal. And again, they were a little suspicious because I remember at the meeting them saying, well, we've already given you the money, so be on your way. And the only question was, did I have any visas? And I said I didn't. That was at the time when Iran and Iraq was at war with each other, Soviet Union and Afghanistan. And I said, it's never stopped me from traveling. I felt that I could get to China without passport and visas.
Really? What year is this?
1984 is when I left. It took 2 years to set off.
From the UK?
From the UK. And I had a 4-day visa for Iran. I stayed a month and a half. I walked across Afghanistan, entered illegally, left also illegally. I entered China across the border that had been closed since 1949. I was caught 4 days into China. I was then held under house arrest. Eventually, I was given a month's visa, and I stayed 8 months.
I have so much going through my head because everything you're saying is, I couldn't do it, but you did do it. Is your heart racing? Are you're crossing the border and I shouldn't be here and anything can happen at any moment?
Extremely nervous. I can't list the number of times I've said to myself, I'm stopping this, I'm never going to do this again. But I still find myself going back.
Because
with a different goal now. Now is really, really focused on people. It wasn't then. I mean, my professional career has really changed. To move ahead a little bit as a result of that journey. When I came home, I wanted to go back to painting, but lots of publishers wanted me to write the story of that journey. And I did, but I forgot about the book. I needed a job and work. I wanted to go back to painting, and I ended up in New York as a janitor, working as a cashier at Paul Smith.
Sorry, you're in China, and then now you're telling me you're a janitor.
Well, I wrote the book. Yeah. No, I wrote the book, and then...
But all I'm saying is, as experiences go, you're in China, you're under house arrest, and then you have a month's visa, and you're living this life, and then later you're a janitor in New York.
Yeah.
Your mind's just always going.
My mind is constantly going. My mind races ahead. I usually end up on the next topic before I finish the earlier one, which is just what's happening here.
I don't know if you can answer this because there's so much that's happened in your life, but what do you remember from China, from that visit?
Well, it was very unusual. 1984, China hadn't really opened. I spent most of my time in Xinjiang in the Western province with the Uyghurs. And then because of the situation where the Chinese police, when I was arrested, they didn't know really what to do with me. So I then spent 2.5 months walking across Tibet. They always threatened me with prison or a fine. Initially, it was a fine, but by then I had just over $100 left. I was spending about $1 a day. I was sleeping outside, which also was quite an experience in China. If I woke up late, which was usually around 5:30, in major Chinese cities, because I didn't have the visa, so I couldn't check into hotels. So I often found myself on the forecourt of the station where at the time lots of Chinese people would sleep at night because they were migrants or travelers and seeking new opportunities.
Could you communicate with them?
Very little. In Chinese, I found really difficult. In Xinjiang, yes, because through Afghanistan, I managed to pick up quite a bit of Dari. So today I can kind of communicate in a few languages out of necessity. But after that, it became very complicated. And it was very difficult to make myself even who I was. I mean, in Tibet, they thought I was a Muslim trader. Because to go through those countries without passport and visas, basically I traveled in disguise. So I was dressed in shalwar kameez with a turban. I had a big beard. My beard actually was so big that in Western China, I didn't understand. They kept on calling me Marx. It was either Mr. Nick or Marx. And then one day I entered an arena, and there on the wall were posters of Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and Mao Zedong. And then I understood that they equated my beard with the beard of Karl Marx, hence the nickname.
With age, would you say that you still have that confidence to cross a border and just find your way? Or do you find the limitations, the visas, the legalities, the police?
I could be incriminating myself here. No, I still, there's an occasion to travel with guerrilla groups, and because You can't travel
Okay.
officially.
For people listening, myself included, what does that feel like? You embed yourself and you just put yourself, your faith in this group of people.
Yeah, well, there's something really, really important to say about this is that, these are not solo journeys. I might be on my own, but I'm not really on my own. I usually have extraordinary local guides, people who are risking much more than myself, who make these opportunities happen for me. And really, they're the ones who have the courage, the skills, the knowledge. I'm just a novice each time. I don't know the local background. Often I don't know the local languages. And so in many ways, they're my eyes and ears. They're my security. I put my trust and faith in them. I mean, it requires a lot of research to seek out the right people that you can trust. But I rarely have crossed a border clandestinely without the help of local people.
Did you ever feel that your life was endangered?
My answer to that question is that the people I visit, their life is often in danger on a very regular basis. Usually, I don't always have a return ticket, but I have a passport and I can make my way home. They don't have that. And that's a huge difference. So that's kind of why I don't really want to say putting my life in danger. If my life is in danger, usually someone else's life is in danger. And it's not usually just one person. It's usually a community. And in some ways, that is another aspect that gives me the courage to continue what I'm doing, because I feel that I'm just a visitor. They have to live through this. And that's the difficulty in trying to communicate. I mean, although I make documentary films occasionally, and books, and as you mentioned, the photography, even me, when I look back, it's hard to remember just how difficult, how painful, and sometimes how traumatic it is to witness events. But I'm still one step removed because I'm not living that experience. It's a temporary moment in my life.
One of the things that you talked to me about was helping families who are missing other family members, and that their lives are in limbo, trying to find answers or closure. Can you give an example? Can you talk to us about what that is? How can you help these families? What is it like? Because you must have to gain their trust as well, and their grieving, even though there's no actual death or there's no family member. How does that work? How do you just go into these situations, and can you help?
Well, again, I mean, this is, again, one of the tragedies of conflict, which is not really spoken about, is the people who go missing. Families don't know whether they're alive or dead. People prey on them because they say they have information, but they need to pay for that information, etc. And I go back to the same thing about traveling into difficult areas of the world, that I'm assisted by people who have built up that trust, or have the knowledge, or have the contacts with the people living in these really difficult, not to say traumatic, circumstances. So I can think of Olya, who now is in Belgrade. Now she knows that her husband didn't survive, but for 10 years, I followed Olya's story. And when she used to go to the church, as she said to me the first time that I accompanied her to the church, it was, I don't know whether to put the candle in the bottom part for the deceased or on the top part for the living. And that limbo is just, it's just terrible to think that every moment of your day you're thinking about, where are they still alive, what condition are they in? And we can see that recently, obviously, with what has taken place in the Middle East, but it's something that continues to take place across the world, whether it's in Mexico, whether it's in Honduras or El Salvador, where there are cartels operating and we know there are many disappearances. Families are totally bereft. They just often not only don't know the circumstances of their loved one, but they don't know who to turn to try and find those, shall we say, steps to help them gain the knowledge, to get some information. So again, I've worked with people, again, like the International Committee of the Red Cross, the International Commission of Missing Persons. So groups whose specific purpose, or one of their specific purposes, is to trace people who've gone missing. And indeed, on that, I mean, there's now the scientific, we know how from bones that are recovered from mass grave sites, you can identify people. So, that's more interesting for people interested in the sciences, but it's a really important element now as to how to identify people whose remains might possibly have been discovered. And stories can be really at home. I mean, you mentioned about me teaching at schools here. I was in a lycée, I won't mention which one, in Monaco, and at the end of one of my interventions, this young woman came up to me and said, my cousin has gone missing in Mexico, and we don't know what to do. We haven't heard from her for the last 2 months.
And you were able to help?
I'm not
can you
directly.
Not? Can you turn your back and say, I can't help you?
In this case, it's very concrete, because there are steps that can be taken today to try and find missing loved ones.
How do you actually separate yourself from a story? Or has there ever been a moment where you just couldn't? You couldn't turn it off. You were so involved in finding someone, in helping somebody and their story.
Well, I trained as an artist, and initially when I started this work, it was like, oh, you've got to be independent, impartial. I mean, I believe all of that, but it's like you're reporting a story. But no, I mean, there's right and wrong. I think today that's what I'm hoping to achieve is, look at the right ways, the good ways, and so I do get very emotional. It's hard. I mean, I think it's hard for anyone going into these areas not to get emotionally attached. It's very difficult to be dispassionate. And in fact, if I go back to the early days in Afghanistan when I was with the Mujahideen, then I was horrified by what was taking place. The war, the massacres, entire villages wiped out, what we see in parts of the world still today. And you get very involved, you see the horrors, but that also stops you from seeing the bigger picture. And I think over the course of decades now, I think it's really important also to look at the bigger picture. There's often no right and wrong, no war is black and white. And I think it's just unfortunate. Again, in the Russian classes, we do discuss the conflict in Ukraine and Russia, and I try to point out how people are viewing the conflict today and how we, and them, particularly as students, even if they're Russian and Ukrainian students, need to look at a conflict in order to hopefully be able, I think, to at least try and understand other people's perspective.
Not an easy task for young people, is it?
Not at all. I think today, especially as news, I wouldn't even call it news, what is available to young people on social media tends to push people towards further extremes. We're already living in a pretty extremist environment of whatever complexion. But I really want, just at this point, if you don't mind, I want to stress, we are not born racist. We are not born with all of these hateful, discriminatory, phobic attitudes that are increasingly prevalent across the world.
I remember I interviewed the author Henning Menkel, and he was talking about, he died several years ago, but he was talking at that time about the internet and young people, and that, the internet is a wonderful, wonderful world to be able to discover and be informed. But the problem is people don't have filters for that information. And so we're not being informed. They're just words. And unfortunately, it is being taken in maybe not the best way. People just search for what says that they are right, especially for young people. Everybody wants to be right rather than, take a look at what's really going on.
I've been covering some of the same conflict zones for decades. And if someone says, what's the situation, I'm still at a loss to tell them. I mean, it's so easy to be persuaded by people today. People are bombarded, and they're bombarded with pretty vile, extreme views. And I suppose another battle is trying to promote our common humanity.
Yeah.
Look at people. look at what is really taking place today. And people are very fortunate here. They travel, but I traveled with my parents, but we usually stayed in a hotel that could have been in any country. It didn't really tell me what the country was like. If we go back to Kenya, which I mentioned earlier on, you can go on a wonderful safari. The herders I was with, I mean, there are clashes. People are being killed with Kalashnikovs because of the drought, because of the lack of grazing ground. And so, people have an impression of a country without really seeing what it's really like for the people living there.
Well, also, and everyone has their own story, like this woman in the school here with the missing relative in Mexico. But you even had a call from one of our other guests on Monaco Info, the man of EasyJet, and I was really surprised that he called you MY. Can you share that story?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, I suppose as long as he doesn't mind. Yeah. I mean, it was amazing because I was having dinner at home and it was my son who took the call on the landline. I try not to use the cell phone as much as possible, and he said it's Stelios, but at that point it didn't really register. And actually, interestingly, to come back to your point about missing people, he was reading about a project that I had worked on that became a book about people who'd gone missing in Cyprus during the two conflicts that took place in the 60s and 70s in Cyprus. And there he was saying, I was born in Cyprus. He's passionate about his community and he leads bi-communal projects. And so asked me whether I was interested in partaking and promoting.
Did he make you nervous? Because when Sir Stelios came on the show, he makes me very nervous. His voice makes me nervous.
I'm of a nervous disposition anyway, so I'm constantly stressed. So, but again, I would in that particular project stress to produce the goods. I'm always battling to try and represent people, places in the best possible way.
The world has changed since you started out, especially with social media and the different types of platforms we have to get stories out. So when, first of all, did you kind of go from being a photographer to a documentary maker? And do you see that there's more opportunities now for documentaries to be shared that deserve to be shared? Or like, does Netflix, is it a game changer? How are we getting these things out now compared to when you first started out?
Well, I think there were more, actually. I think in terms of documentary filmmaking, there used to be more opportunities. Because
really?
we had broadcast networks, they had budgets, they commissioned documentaries. Today, very, very few documentary filmmakers are being commissioned by traditional broadcasters.
That was my question. Are you getting financed? How do you get financed? Yeah.
Anyone out there?
It all comes down to it, right?
So now, it's crowdfunding. There are all sorts of means and ways of raising money, different from before, but it's much tougher environment. And,
really?
Yeah, much, much tougher. And, the platforms like Netflix, they're celebrity-led documentaries usually. I've been in touch with, Netflix have asked me, because I also run this co-run a non-for-profit called Picture People, and that's what we do. We try and promote young filmmakers across the world to document their lives.
Okay.
Not their lives specifically, their communities, marginalized and vulnerable communities. So Netflix are interested, but they have a particular type of documentary that they're looking for. So it's more complicated. There's less funding, and people who invest in documentaries think they're going to make a return on their investment, but that is so rare.
Well, what kind of people reach out to you at the nonprofit then?
So foundations. I'm going to repeat the word again. That wasn't on purpose.
I didn't hear you, Nick. What? Foundations?
So, I look to foundations. I look to other non-for-profits, cultural organizations. So there's a whole panoply of various types of funders that come forward. Some ask me to do projects, and then there are other projects where I've got to go looking for financing. So, at the end of this year, I'd like to do a project about a particular indigenous group of people living in southwestern Africa. I have no funding for it. I don't think any news media outlet would put up the money, which they would have done in the past. So it will be a hard call to find someone who's going to finance me to spend three weeks in the bush, my expenses will be very limited, but I've got to get there. I've got to find a guide who I can trust, who has the local knowledge, who can explain what it is that I'm trying to do, because I'm often going to places where what I'm actually trying to put forward is a very intimate portrait of people's lives. And that is where the trust comes into it.
Well, is that, you seem to be a professional at that kind of portrait of lives, because I was looking at your book, Another Life. And so you took photos in 8 of the world's poorest countries, and you went and photographed, if I understand correctly, 2005, 2010, and 2015 to see if the United Nations Millennium Goals were taking effect, were working. Can you explain that? Like, did you see real progress in the 10 years that you were taking these photos?
Well, I mean, that, just to give you a kind of picture of it, so that was commissioned by a non-governmental organization. And
that approached you, or did you approach
me?
Them? Okay.
Yeah, well, they actually approached another photographer.
But I wasn't available, so they went to you.
So, well, they actually approached Sebastião Salgado. He wasn't interested. I very fortunately got the gig, as it were, and I thought it was really interesting. Extraordinary stories of individuals and their families. But I thought, well, if we want to show whether there's progress or not, we've got to go back. And the NGO was no longer interested. So that's when I again had to go to foundations, grant-giving bodies, and not only 5 years later, but 10 years later as well. And so the Swiss Development Corporation put up some money. Here, actually, the Prince Albert II Foundation also put in some money. So a wide variety of organizations. Oak Foundation, The Guardian. So the Guardian newspaper also, actually, they helped me finish the project. There was still a shortfall. But in terms of progress, interestingly, probably the greatest progress was on gender rights, particularly transgender rights, but those are the ones now we can see the backsliding. But in terms of, I would say, people living in extreme poverty, the situation still remains really dire. There are probably now even more people facing, not necessarily in extreme poverty, but facing extreme poverty. People who don't know where their next meal is going to come from, simply because they don't have the money to purchase items of food that they can consume. I mean, this is, unfortunately, I've been to areas where there have been famines, and people say it's the drought, it's this, it's that. But actually, it's because people don't have the money. I've never been to a country where there's a famine where you can't buy food. I mean, obviously, there are other causes, as I said earlier on. It's not black and white. Sometimes it's related to infrastructure. It's related, obviously, to the governments in power. I mean, I believe that no country there's been a democracy has a famine existed in.
How do you come back home to Monaco? And do you like to have fun? Because it's a very serious world that you live in. And I mean, you have 6 children and a wife. How do you not bring that back? Or maybe that allows you to have better relationships with them because you see what's going on and you come home to that sort of foundation. But you're living these extreme lives, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say the hardest thing is coming back. I mean, simple things, I go to the supermarket usually on a Saturday or Sunday when we're doing our shopping. And if, we mentioned famine, I mean, I've followed, in fact, you mentioned Another Life where 2 twin sisters didn't make it to their first birthday because the family couldn't afford milk powder. I mean, again, photojournalism is also, is about investigating. It turned out they had diarrhea. They probably died because they were dehydrated. But, you stand in front of a supermarket shelf where there's milk. You have how many varieties of milk today? How many brands? How many different types of additives that, it's insane. So, the choice for me is bewildering. And positively, my family keep me sane because when I'm home, it is, husband, dad, whatever. But I think it's probably sometimes difficult for them. I can't stand them leaving any food on the plate.
Oh, I imagine.
They call me l'aspirateur, the Hoover, because I tend to eat up what they don't eat. And yeah, it's difficult. As they've got older, I do relate to stories, but it's so different from our daily lives here that, It makes life uncomfortable, particularly for, I think, teenagers and late teenagers to realize what is taking place for other young people like them elsewhere in the world. And in many ways, there's, I mean, you said poor countries. I mean, actually, these are mineral wealth countries. And yet there's wars we're seeing now at the moment, what's happening in Congo, which has gone on now for decades. There's, 6 million dead, hundreds of thousands of women who've been sexually abused. And yet, it's thanks to coltan and cobalt that comes from Congo that's in our pockets today with our mobile phones that we live the life we live. So I'm not sure how much people here want to be reminded that we benefit, unfortunately, if I want to be really hard-nosed about it, through other people's misery.
Well, it brings two questions to mind. One,
and you did ask me about serious. Maybe I am overly serious.
No. I see where you're coming from, because
it's difficult.
It brings two questions to mind, and I'll say them because I'll forget if I don't. But one is, how then do your children see you and relate to you? And the other question is, how do you not flip out and scream at people that are making, complaining about things that are so irrelevant in life? And, we say, don't cry over spilt milk and don't sweat the small things, but people do. And you have been in the middle of all of these conflicts and real human moments. So is it difficult for you? Do you just have to bite your tongue?
Well, I complain too. It's like you come back and there's another reality.
I'm really happy about that. I was like, oh, geez. We all do.
I can laugh occasionally, like I've just done. I need to remind myself of that. It's difficult. It really is complicated, and I don't want to put people's nose in it.
No,
I think it's an incredible privilege to go into schools, and I don't like saying this because I hate any form of sort of self-reverence. But I now have kids in première and terminale, the last 2 years of the lycée, the high school, and
the public schools in Monaco.
Public schools, yeah, non-fee paying. They remember the talk I gave to them when they were in primary school. So I do the last year of primary school, almost all the classes in the Principality, and they remember the stories like you said. So those 10 years, they can remember stories about Marietta, which I don't tell Marietta stories to primary school kids. Very careful. But Abbas is a young miner who risks his life on a daily basis to extract gold, doesn't know what gold's about. The kids remember, as 17, 18-year-olds.
Do they ask you questions?
Yeah, there's plenty of questions.
When you tell a story like that, what is a question a young person has? Because it's a world they can't really comprehend.
Well, I think, they do ask what it's like for me, similar to you, what's it like coming back? I think that's one of the questions that is often asked. And then I think a lot of them, because it's terminale and première, they're concerned about their future. So they'll ask me, about any advice or suggestions. Some are really engaged. Others are completely clueless. And I hate to say it, but, general knowledge is on the wane. And that scares me because increasingly I go into classes, they don't know where countries are on the map. They don't know what is taking place elsewhere in the world. And I find that sad, but also a little frightening.
Unfortunately, I don't even think it's limited to young people. I think
it's probably not limited yet to young people, but I have that opportunity to go into schools, not just in the Principality, some universities as well, and a picture of people. We do that as well. I mean, we run a summer school, but those are already. I mean, like the summer school, they're really amazing. They're engaged people who want to change the world, and there are a lot of young people out there who really, environmental activists, human rights activists, or defenders, people putting themselves on the lines. I mean, in November, I was out in the Philippines mentoring young Philippine filmmakers. I mean, some of them are risking their lives trying to document what's happening to their own communities.
How, though, do we spark that curiosity in young people?
Well, I would say, watching a documentary film, it could be a feature film. You know, it could be Philadelphia about HIV/AIDS. It's an old film that maybe
Great
the
film.
audience, yeah. You know, I mean, I think that's, again, what worries me is if I go into primary school or the lycée, I'll say, you know, who inspires you at primary level? It's going to be sports figures. And if you say why, it's to make money, which I cringe at. I think, oh my, you know, they're not even teenagers and they want to make money. They don't, and you know, I think of so many people who continue to inspire me today, whether it's Nelson Mandela, Malala, Greta Thunberg. It goes, the list is endless of people who are inspiring characters. And, you know, Martin Luther King, you know, the I Dream speech for me, you know, just to adapt it, it's, you know, I hope that one day people will not be judged on, you know, the color of their skin or their denomination or their ethnicity, but on the content of their character.
So going back to your family then, how do your own children see you?
Well, they definitely don't want to do what I do. I think that's...
Not one of them has said, okay, I'm ready.
Well, one interestingly, so she's interested in art and she's studying law because she wants to track down people who do money laundering through art. So
that's interesting.
The other one has just got a contract. He's just 18 and he is going to fly for Ryanair. Sorry, Stelios. The competition won out on that. They offered better conditions.
Wow.
Hence being in Ireland. And fortunately, it was the day that he did his solo flight. And we were... he did very well.
Were you nervous for him?
No. I think he's since the age of 5, that's all he's wanted to ever do.
Really? Is he one of the members of the Monaco
Air League? Yes, he is.
Good for him.
He's
okay.
Monaco Air League. And then I have his twin sister who's studying international relations. She's supremely dynamic, huge amount of energy, but I don't think she's quite sure what she wants to do. I think she'd probably like to be an agent for rap artists. Oh. That's where her heart is, but
why not?
They're socially committed, so yep. I have no bones as long as they're happy.
Well, you said to me, one of the quotes that stayed with you is, with opportunity comes responsibility. So if these young people are growing up and following their dreams and doing something with it, right, that matters.
I have to say that was Winston Churchill.
No, wait, sorry, I didn't mean to say, Nick told me this. This is Nick's quote. No,
I wish I
paraphrased
could
it. Yes,
claim for
sorry about that. Let's talk a little bit about Monaco.
Yeah.
First of all, why did you come to Monaco and when? Because it seems to be you're Monegasque.
Yeah.
So you weren't born here.
No, I wasn't born here. So I had that unique privilege of becoming Monegasque, which is, you know, like winning the lottery because there's so few of us. It does cause problems at borders, I have to tell you. People often wonder. I've been stopped from coming back to Europe because I didn't have a visa for France, and then the head of immigration said you don't have a Schengen visa, so it can be awkward at times. So I partly grew up here, okay, because my father and uncle were here. And
your father was American,
yeah.
Your mother was
British English,
okay.
Yeah, and so his history went back quite far. So I think he was probably here, in the early 60s. I mean, he very unusual character. He also gave. He was a movie producer at one point, and gave Grace Kelly, Princess Grace, her first screen test in the States. Yeah. So
did he used to tell you this story?
My father didn't tell us a lot of stories, but through my uncle and father, occasionally moments would crop up. Mainly with my children, he would recount, how. So that's one of the reasons he ended up here. And then when after not growing up here, I used to come back because I had childhood friends growing up through teenage years. So the connection was always here. I'm still in touch with people that I grew up as, from really as memory, as far as memory goes back. It was a very different place. There were donkeys going around Casino Square. There were not many high-rise buildings. The steam engine. My brother and I used to, where the Fairmont was, there was like the exit of the tunnel, and we used to peer over, waiting for the steam to hit us. Yeah.
So that was one of my questions. Monaco's obviously changed over the years.
it's
Just a totally
almost
different place.
unrecognizable. I mean, obviously, there's the port here, some of the same buildings, but you could see the train, partially go through Monaco, which you can no longer see.
No.
And the train station is a different train station.
Yeah.
There was a little bridge. I think even Guy Eiffel, who built the Eiffel Tower, there was a little bridge as you came into Monaco, rail bridge that was designed by him.
Did you speak French growing up?
Partially. So, yeah, we had a kind of peripatetic childhood. As I mentioned, when I went to Paris, we left Switzerland. And so that's where I learned French. But I made as much effort as possible to not have a local Vaudois accent.
That's the same as a Canadian. When I start speaking, they're always like, do you speak Québécois? Yeah. No, nobody speaks Québécois. Nobody understands Québécois. So,
bon matinée, they say.
When did you come back then? Sort of
it's a
permanently.
kind of long, complicated story, but so...
I think everything for you is probably a long, in a good way. In a very, story. A very good way.
Well, basically, I'm very attached to Afghanistan. I'd been going for years. And another connection with Monaco was that my first documentary film for the BBC was also shown on Arte, and it so happened that a charity in Monaco, the head of the charity saw the documentary and wanted to finance an orphanage that I had set up in Afghanistan. And I said we didn't need any money because the money had been raised. So that kind of surprised them. And because people, when they saw the documentary, I was inundated by hundreds, if not thousands of letters. I mean, sack full of mail to the BBC. It was incredible.
Saying what?
That people wanted to help. People sent in their paycheck. People sent in their pension.
Can you tell me a little bit about the documentary? What was it that
so the documentary
resonated
was
with
about
people?
Perfectly normal. So basically what happened was I visited a mental asylum on the outskirts of Kabul.
In what year, Nick?
1989.
Okay.
Testing me there. And bizarrely, it was a school friend who led me there. She was working for UNHCR. And she was horrified by what she saw. And what she had seen, and what I immediately also found quite horrifying, was that there were a group of perfectly normal kids living amongst the mentally disturbed. I mean, seriously mentally disturbed. There were naked men chained to the walls, and there were these kids running around. So for a year I tried, during my visits, I went backwards and forwards on different assignments, but I was always hoping assignments would take me back to Afghanistan. I got people to say, yeah, we'll do something, and they didn't. And so a year later I decided to get them out of the mental asylum into a safe house of their own.
Were you met with resistance on the ground there?
No. Actually, it was the Afghan Red Crescent that gave me a house and said, we don't have the money to renovate it. If this suits you, it's yours. Sadly, the Aga Khan died today, but Sadruddin Aga Khan, his wife put up money for the renovation, Norwegian Red Cross, so various groups, and it functioned for a while, and the children were moved out of the mental asylum. And so the BBC documentary was about the situation, but I ended up staying for months on end till I managed to open up this orphanage. And to cut a long story short, at the end of all the different wars that still haven't finished, there were 3 young people still left there after many, many years. So I'd known them for 7 years, and when the Taliban took power, I decided enough was enough. And so we all left together out of Afghanistan, and that charity that had originally seen the documentary said, why not bring them to Monaco? And I was a single parent and ended up in Monaco with the 3 kids.
What ages were they?
They were 10, 11, and 13. And couldn't speak English or French. They're trilingual today.
They were welcomed by the community?
Amazing. I asked the Éducation Nationale if they could be in different schools so that they, would learn the language quickly. And I don't think, and hand on heart, I don't think any other country would have provided the support and help, integrate them in the way that has happened here.
Did they have a first reaction to coming here from a country?
It was a long journey. It took it. I mean,
I mean-
we lived literally for like 4.5 months in Peshawar in Pakistan. So already that was a shock because when we left Kabul, then, there was no electricity. It was bombed out, and Peshawar already, that was like Disneyland. So, I mean, it was progressive. It took a long time to get here. I think it took nearly a year.
Wow.
With visas and...
I don't know what, yeah. And they're just happy kids, and you probably wouldn't have had that opportunity in another country then. It was really...
that was part of, I mean, for a while I had nowhere. And that was one of the complications because as a single parent, many countries in those days, it wasn't possible to take on kids in the way that some countries said yes. Belgium, Ireland, through the International Committee of the Red Cross, Switzerland said it might be possible. But we were kind of welcomed with open arms and very fortunate.
You really are there for kids. You're really doing, I mean, even in Monaco, you're with the Action Innocence Monaco, and you've been with that association. It's a nonprofit for a long time, and you are really on about the use of the internet, and you're trying to educate children and their parents. How did you get involved in that? And again, do you see progress being made in how parents can control a little bit of what their kids, because this is really dangerous what's going on?
Well, I was asked before the association was set up, so I was asked to be one of the members, and it was important. I think we started 23 years ago, if I've got that right, maybe 22, and obviously technology is involved dramatically. Initially, we didn't go into all the schools because it was limited to a certain age group. Now we are in primary schools all the way through to the lycée. And I think one of the positive things that has changed, but it's a real struggle, is to get parents involved. Our original parent meetings, we had like 2 parents, maybe 3. When it increased, they were usually parents who were teachers themselves or teachers who were parents. Now there's much more interest from parents, and there's a much greater take-up from the parents. And also we now basically every year throughout the school system here in Monaco, one of our psychologists will be in the class to talk about the latest risks, the new developments, and not just warn them of the dangers, but how to protect themselves from those who would wish ill.
That must be really difficult, because it's one thing to share that type of information with young people, but you have to be rather gifted as a communicator, whoever is leading those classes, so that they actually listen.
But that's not easy. We do have a tough time recruiting psychologists, and there is a turnover occasionally because obviously they want to then have their own practice, et cetera, et cetera. So we've had brilliant psychologists, but obviously, like everyone, there's careers, change of some have become mothers and they take time off. So indeed, that we're always, anyone out there listening, we're always looking for talented psychologists, because when I say talented, it's exactly what you're saying, is to be able to communicate at the level that you are there for, because from talking to primary school kids is very different from talking to high school kids, and the nature of what we're talking about is very different at each level.
Do children see that there's a risk? Or when you're talking to them, when the association's talking to them, can you see that?
Yeah, they know.
They're like, whoa, I didn't realize that.
One of the things that really dumbfounds me is, like, there's a game called GTA. It's, I think the advisory is not for under 18. We have 9, 10-year-old kids on this game where there's, violence, rape, sex, whatever you want to name it. And,
what?
They know that it's not advised, for those that are under 18. And you think, well, where are the parents?
Where are the parents?
Good question.
Oh. Well, if you look at your career, and would I say that you have a photo or a moment for you that means more or defines your career more than one of the other? You were explaining a photo that you took, and I was able to look it up online, and it's really quite remarkable. During COVID, you were working with the hospital here, the CHPG, and they were trying to show how they were working alongside other communities?
Yeah, I mean, it took me a long time, especially here, to get permission to do what I ended up doing. But yeah, it was to show, again, these remarkable people who put their lives on the line. So mainly nurses and auxiliary nurses, aides-soignants, who really were there to save people at whatever their personal cost. And I think the picture that you are referring to was actually taken in a hospital in northeastern France, in Mulhouse. Okay. But that was with a team of nurses. There was a doctor as well, but nurses and auxiliary nurses who left the south of France to go to that hospital because the needs were so great. They didn't have enough medical personnel. They had, I think it was 350 deaths in the hospital. And again, amongst, the CHPG staff, there was a young mother who did a second tour, as it were. She didn't want to come home. She wanted to help the patients. Totally selfless. And the picture is a moment where a man who was in an artificially induced coma wakes up. And obviously, particularly in France, or maybe not obvious to your listeners, but you're not allowed to take pictures without someone's permission, but you're not going to ask someone as they wake up to sign a document. So, by then I knew, how the medical staff would handle patients. So it's, this amazingly touching, touching because the people, the nurse and the auxiliary nurse who are sort of cradling this man because they have to announce to him after 3 weeks of being in an artificially induced coma that his wife hadn't made it. And there they are with patients. They're hugging them, they're holding them close, even though that could put them at risk. Obviously, they had all of the protective gear, but they didn't have the same protective gear that was here. I was given this amazing protective gear. I was embarrassed to put it on, so I didn't put it on. I took what was available locally and then left what I was given here for the staff once I'd gone. I mean, I think that's another important thing is that, I go back to feeling very fortunate. I don't want to stick out. I want to be able to be as anonymous and as much a fly on the wall as possible and just let things happen around me.
I have to be honest, as you're telling me this, and I think we should have like the Nick hour, like once a week, like just come and talk, because do you find other people interesting? Like you're just a remarkable source of knowledge and interesting and a storyteller. Like that's a high bar for dinner conversation.
But you said it. Everyone has a story. Stand at a bus stop. I run like these workshops for people to do photography, but I tell them, go out. Now I want you to take pictures. Oh, I can't ask someone. And the experience of that is that very rarely does anyone say no if you explain what you're doing. And they come back and they've met incredible people because everyone is incredible. Everyone has a story. And I don't believe, anyone should rise above anyone else. We all have the same desires and ambitions. We just shouldn't get away and ahead of ourselves.
Nick, this has just been absolutely phenomenal. I really appreciate your honesty and your real humbleness about your life because you're doing a lot for other people. And I appreciate the fact that you've come and talked to Monaco Info, the podcast in English. And I feel like we need to stay in touch. I need to know what happens next. So thank you so much.
I'm surprised you want me on the podcast, but
thank you really so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome.